All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is the 11:30 a.m. Briefing for Hurricane Florence. What we want to emphasize here with this briefing is that Florence is still an extremely slow-moving hurricane, and it is likely to produce extreme rainfall and life-threatening flash flooding across southeast North Carolina and flooding, obviously, elsewhere in North Carolina. The very slow movement, coupled with a large wind field, will result in a long duration of 24 to 36 hours of strong to damaging winds across portions of eastern and central North Carolina. The maps here do indicate where we have our hurricane warning, which covers Sampson and Wayne counties in our central North Carolina area. And then we also have a tropical storm warning from Richmond County through Scotland, Moore, and then all the way up that tier of counties, including Johnston and through Wilson and Edgecombe. We also have a flash flood watch in effect for most of central North Carolina, with the exception of the northern tier of counties from like Forsyth all the way through Person, Granville, and then up into Halifax. So here's our summary of impacts, and you can see not a lot has changed in regard to the flooding impacts. We are still expecting extreme impacts with regard to both flash flooding and river flooding, primarily across the Piedmont Sandhills and coastal plain. The wind threat is still very significant, primarily, again, across the Sandhills and the coastal plain areas, and we have a limited tornado threat, and that's limited primarily to the far east-southeast areas, so maybe Sampson, Wayne County, the far eastern and southern reaches of those counties there. And then also with the flooding, the strong winds, and the likelihood of trees coming down, we are expecting significant impacts from power outages, and that is for all of central North Carolina. So this slide here, I won't go, cover everything. You can see what it says. I won't bore you with repeating it all, but the primary impacts, locations, and timing are outlined on this slide. The impacts from the wind and the flooding are expected to begin late this afternoon and persist into and through the weekend. The river flooding will probably begin over the weekend and persist again into early next week, if not longer. Tornado threat is primarily today through tomorrow evening, through Saturday evening, and then power outages could begin as early as this evening and persist through much of the weekend. Here's the latest track and current data on Florence. As of 11 a.m., the max winds were 110 miles per hour. She was located approximately 145 miles east-southeast of Wilmington, moving northwest at 10 miles per hour, and the minimum central pressure was 955 millibars. The outer rain bands of Florence are already on shore. Although the hurricane force winds, which is this brown area on the map here, that's the extent of the hurricane force winds, which is a pretty large diameter, is still mainly offshore. However, you can see the tropical storm force winds associated with Florence currently extend inland into the coastal plain areas of North Carolina. And Florence is still 145 miles east-southeast of Wilmington. So if that gives you any idea of the magnitude and the size of this storm, we're going to be seeing those tropical storm force winds for quite some time associated with this storm. The current track does bring Florence inland over the coastal southeast North Carolina, roughly in the Wilmington area, give or take, 20, 30 miles on either side, and then brings it inland into South Carolina as we get into tomorrow evening. And you can see the dots get closer together. Again, as we mentioned in several previous briefings, that indicates a slowing of the system with time. And so the the rainfall and the strong winds are going to persist for quite some time. And that's going to be probably where our worst impacts end up coming from, is the longer duration of the winds and the rain. So look at the wind speed probabilities. This is for tropical storm force winds. So the purple shading here is 90 to 100% probability that these areas will see tropical storm force winds, and that covers a good portion of central North Carolina in the 90 to 100% probabilities. Greater than 50% probability covers all of central North Carolina. So everybody should be prepared to experience tropical storm force winds if you live in central North Carolina, especially points farther south and east. And then this is a graphic we wanted to show you of the hurricane force wind speed probabilities. You can see that 50% probability line here, that brownish color, does extend into portions of central North Carolina, primarily the coastal plain, Sampson, maybe parts of Wayne County, but it does extend up into that area. So there is a 50% probability that portions of Sampson and Wayne County could see hurricane force winds. And then the most likely arrival time of the tropical storm force winds appears to be, this evening, roughly between 5 and 10 p.m. across the eastern portions of the area, and then by the early overnight hours or late this evening across points further west. So the wind threat, just to highlight here, we are expecting, be prepared for damaging winds and perhaps destructive wind gusts of up to hurricane force, especially across Sampson, Cumberland, and Wayne counties. That will result in probably widespread power outages as a result of trees and power lines being blown down. And that should begin this afternoon and persist into Saturday morning. And the threat decreases a little bit as you go farther north and west, but we do still have a moderate threat for those damaging and destructive winds as you go into Wake County, Anson County, up through Edgecombe County, so that arc there. Taking a look at what we have currently forecast for our expected peak winds, both sustained on the left and gust on the right. So for the far southeastern portions of the area, so Sampson, Wayne, Cumberland counties, I'm highlighting those a lot. Those areas we're expecting sustained winds of anywhere from 35 miles an hour to upwards of possibly 60 as you get down into southern Sampson County. That's just the sustained. The wind gusts are expected to be upwards of 55 to even as high as 85 miles per hour in southern Sampson County. So that's a pretty dire situation. You think of severe thunderstorm warnings, we'll issue a severe thunderstorm warning for winds of greater than 58 miles per hour. So we could be seeing sustained winds of almost that strong with gusts well over that threshold. For points farther to the north and west, the winds, the expected wind speeds and gusts do decrease as you go farther north and west, but that does not mean that they will be light by any means. In Raleigh, we're expecting sustained winds of around 30 miles per hour with gusts to around 50. So again, that's, even though it's less than the coastal plain, it is still quite strong. Hopefully you all can see this graphic and read it okay. This is a predicted onset time of these tropical storm force winds. So for the far southeast, we've got today between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. As you get up into the eastern Piedmont, that would be late tonight, early Friday morning. And then right now we do not have an expected arrival time of tropical storm force winds across like the Triad regions up into Roxborough. So they may be just below that threshold for the creation of this graphic. Here is a 7-day rainfall forecast. This should capture much, if not all, of the rainfall associated with Florence for central North Carolina. You can see, again, we are still forecasting 20+ inches of rain expected over the southeast North Carolina coastline. That does dip into our central North Carolina areas, especially in Cumberland, Sampson, and Wayne counties. They could see anywhere from 10 to 25+ inches across those counties. As we get farther northwest, we're still expecting 6 to 10 inches possibly across the rest of central North Carolina. So even though it's not, 20+ inches, it is still going to cause a lot of problems. It's going to cause a lot of problems with flooding on creeks and streams, as well as, flash flooding in other areas where we get some of those heavier rain showers. So the flooding threat, we are highlighting that is an extreme flooding threat across the Sandhills and coastal plain areas, in the areas I highlighted before. And even as you get up into the towards the Virginia border, we are still expecting some impacts from flooding. 3 to 6 inches is not necessarily a small amount of rain. So relatively speaking, it's not as high as 15 to 20, but it is still significant. So this is a look at the tornado threat. There is a tornado threat as Florence is coming on shore. It is limited in our central North Carolina regions to the far east and southeast regions. But you can see there the image on the left is from the Storm Prediction Center, and they do have a slight risk for tornadoes. And I know that there have already been a couple tornado warnings issued across the central North Carolina coast there. So definitely the threat is there, and it is being realized. And you can see here, this is the area that the tornado threat is expected to be primarily limited to. That's not to say they can't happen outside of that area, but this is the greatest probability of seeing some of those EF0 to EF1 tornadoes. So I wanted to highlight here, I know everybody's really concerned about the rivers, as you should be. The ensemble forecasts predict most, if not all, of the rivers across central North Carolina to have the potential to reach major flood stage. That is the high end of the guidance. It does not by any means mean that is definitely going to happen. The column in the middle there is the most likely crest for all of the main river points across central North Carolina. So as we get up to the Roanoke River, they're expecting probably the lowest amount of rainfall with this system, and so their most likely crest is below flood stage. However, some of the model guidance does suggest that they could get in the minor to moderate range, so they could still see some river flooding in that area. But as you get down into the Neuse and the Tar, the Cape Fear River basins, those are all, even in the most likely situation, expected to reach minor to moderate flooding. So be prepared for moderate to major flooding. Be prepared for major flooding if you live along the Haw River, the Neuse River, the Cape Fear River. Those are areas where we are expecting at least moderate flooding, but the likelihood is there for major flooding. And this slide here just kind of summarizes what we're expecting and where we're expecting it. So we've got 2 to 4 inches of rain across the northern portions with sustained winds in the 15 to 25 mile per hour range. We could see gusts as high as 30 to 35. As you get farther south and east across, the triangle along basically the US 1 corridor there, we are expecting roughly 6 to 8 inches of rain. Some locally higher amounts are possible, especially with the rain bands, and sustained winds of 15 to 30, gusting upwards of 40 miles per hour. So with that, we are expecting trees to come down, power outages are likely, and definitely some river flooding is expected there. And then the impacts get worse as you go farther south and east. So along and east of I-95, we'll see even higher amounts of rainfall, again, sustained winds 30 to 40 with gusts upwards of 50 plus, and moderate river flooding. And then as we get into the coastal plain and sandhills, 10 to 20 plus inches of rainfall is expected. Very, very dangerous flash flooding, river flooding. wind gusts upwards of 70 plus with sustained winds in the 40 to 50 mile per hour range, and major river flooding is expected in those areas. So this is just to give you an idea. Rainfall totals of 10 to 20 inches are likely to cause widespread flooding, dangerous travel conditions if you can even get anywhere, and washed out roadways in the coastal plain. I want to reiterate one thing that I heard from some rescue personnel. If you cannot see the lines on the road, do not drive into that road. Even if you drive it every day and you know where the road is and you can navigate it on your own, it could be washed out, could not be there anymore. There could be hazards in there you can't see. So tell people, if you can't see the lines on the road, do not go into that water. Turn around, don't drown. So confidence at this point is high that this event is going to occur. There's moderate confidence expected on the impacts, and that is due mainly to the uncertainty of exactly where those rain bands are going to be set up and where that rainfall and those stronger winds are going to be. But we do expect it somewhere across central North Carolina to be pretty bad. So sustained strong wind gusts are expected today, persisting into the weekend. The strongest will be across the southeastern coastal plain. Flash and eventually river flooding are likely to begin this evening and persist again through the weekend and into early next week. And with that, remember that sometimes the rivers are a little bit slower to respond in some places than others, or it may take a while for the rain that fell upstream to reach a point downstream. And so that river flooding in some places could persist through next week, depending on how much rainfall we get. So just because the rain ends doesn't necessarily mean that the river flooding threat is over. And then the risk for some short-lived and weak tornadoes with these rain bands as they come ashore is possible. Primarily, these tornadoes tend to be EF0, EF1 in strength. Doesn't make them any less bad for the people who experience them, but they are not expected to be the EF3s and 4s that you may see with some other thunderstorms. If you have 3 key takeaway points here, I'll just let you read these. I've gone over them a couple of times. Hurricane warnings and tropical storm warnings are in effect. We have flash flood watches. Biggest threats are going to be from the flooding and the strong winds bringing down trees and power lines and causing power outages. The next briefing will be at 5:30 p.m. today. This slide obviously wasn't updated, but that should say 5:30 p.m. Thursday. So expect 5:30 p.m. this evening to be the next briefing. If you need a little clarification for what is a watch, what is a warning, I know these hurricane and tropical storm watches and warnings are new to the central North Carolina area, so I will just leave this slide up for a couple more seconds and let you read this. And again, you guys are going to get an email of all these slides, so if you want to, hang on to this and forward this on out to the folks that may need some clarification, by all means do so. Okay, at the URL there on the top is our one-stop shop for tropical products, so please visit that, and if you have any questions, definitely we are here to answer them for you. And with that, I know I do have some questions, so please keep them coming, and I will get through these as best as I can.